Welcome to this special episode of the Shared Security Podcast. This is part 2 of our series with PlexTrac, in which we are discussing the problem of data overload in the world of vulnerability remediation. And joining me for this conversation is Dan DeCloss, CTO and founder of PlexTrac. Welcome back to the show, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Good to be here again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's like we just talked.
I know.
We did.
We did, yeah.
So in part 1 of our 3-part series, we discussed with Dan and special guest David Schloss key data and workflow challenges that are burying many of us in this industry into busy work and distracting us from the bigger picture, which is creating business value and maintaining data security. So today, we want to go a little deeper into actually seeing how PlexTrac can help solve challenges with data management that you might be having, and surfacing directional insights and integrating remediation workflows across your teams. So to start, I think everybody knows security teams these days are just drowning in vulnerability data. I'm sure you see it all the time with your customers. We've got challenges with multiple tools, many different data sources of vulnerability information, and it's just making it hard to prioritize and act quickly on findings and vulnerabilities and just making our organizations more secure. So the question for you, Dan, so what strategies have you been seeing that kind of cut through all this noise and bring that right context and, build those remediation workflows that actually work?
Yeah. No, I think like we talked a little bit about like last time, just this how big of a challenge this is. And so what we're definitely seeing is the ability to have some kind of place to start in terms of like, hey, I know that I can bring this data in from multiple sources, but I feel like I've got an ocean now of data to start to sift through. So how can I provide some level of objectivity in terms of the context, but within the subjective nature of our business, right? And so that's like the notion of being able to say like, hey, I've got this criteria on these types of findings and on these types of assets that I really want to prioritize higher. So it starts with knowing a little bit about your organization, like understanding like, hey, your organization best. Any tooling out there, including any like third-party service provider that you may be hiring, you're going to know your organization and not only the culture, but the context of your business and operations and how you've structured your infrastructure. You're going to know that the best, right? A pen testing firm or a vulnerability scanning tool, may find gaps and weaknesses in that. But then it's your job to really be able to distill it down as like, what does this have in terms of an impact on us as a business, and then how do we prioritize that accordingly? So what we're seeing is exactly that approach. Like people will build their own systems just to help, or like they're what I've actually seen is like very complex spreadsheets.
That's the worst.
to try and actually help prioritize some of those items and distill down like, hey, these are the most important things to focus on first. Be able to actually tell that story to the right stakeholders. And I think that's a really important key. So there's kind of 3 legs of the stool that I see is like, one, being able to make sense of the data, being able to apply remediation workflows around that data, from a prioritized perspective, and then being able to tell the story of like how we're doing, right? Are we making progress? Are we working on the right things? Are we getting better over time, right? And so those are I think the 3 legs of the stool that I think people really should focus on, and that we're seeing that come to fruition. Obviously we feel like PlexTrac plays a good part of that story.
Yeah, definitely. So it'd be great to see kind of some of the features of PlexTrac to show our audience that this is possible, that you can get away from spreadsheets with crazy formulas. I mean, I'm guilty. I was that person. And I'm sure many of our listeners are. So yeah, let's kind of dig into things and see how this works.
Right.
And for our listeners that are listening to the audio version of this, jump over to our YouTube channel so you can see the demo that Dan is going to be going through right now.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start at a high level. Like the goals of PlexTrac have always been around being able to help tell the right story, right? And help facilitate the workflows around telling the right story around what are the biggest gaps that we have. And we started in our roots of being able to help testing teams report better. So we've always been a reporting oriented company. And so that's what also gives us a unique advantage of the type of data that we can help bring together, right, from various sources. So at a high level, like when you log into PlexTrac, you do get kind of a perspective of general, like how many findings do we have, and we can start to drill in based on a finding or an asset-based approach. If we've set criticality of findings, I can drill in right away and start to see, hey, what findings do I have, right? And this is great, and this can be really helpful. Within the context of PlexTrac, we have status tracking capabilities. So you can provide your own status updates on findings. You can assign them out to people. So it really has been built with the intent to facilitate not just the ingestion of data, but the prioritization of that data and the mobilization of the people responsible for fixing those issues, right? So that is like a high level kind of like perspective of like how we, where our roots are from. As you can see, you can not only assign types of findings to people, but you can also link them to external ticketing systems like Jira, ServiceNow. So this way, the security team can keep PlexTrac at the focal point of their risk reporting, but not interrupt the workflows of potentially the people that are actually responsible for fixing these issues, right? Obviously, you can grant access for anybody to come in and log in and make these status updates, but we try to facilitate as streamlined workflows as possible, through those remediation integrations as well. So this is just kind of a high level view, but like when you really drill into the PlexTrac platform, you can separate your data into clients, you can separate them into departments, however you want to structure it, and then be able to drill down on an individual basis. Hey, what findings do we have within a specific department or a business unit or a client, and how do I get perspective on like, what issues are the most important, right? So we typically, like today, traditionally, we break everything down into individual reports, but you can get an overall view of the top level findings. And I'm going to actually like show you some of the customization here because I'm going to bring it in. We also have this notion of like being able to assign your own risk score, right? So when you have, and see if any of these findings actually have one assigned to them at this point. Yes, here we go. So you'll see like, hey, this finding is labeled as a critical finding, but it has a risk score of 55. So if we were to drill into what that means, here is the kind of the perspective of that we offer, and I'll show you how you get to this score. And where this actually leads is into the prioritization conversation, right? So not all criticals are created equal, right? A critical comes in from a scan source or was manually reported within PlexTrac. And so how do we assign, like, is this one more important than the next one, right? And so that's really what our risk scoring capability is meant to be able to provide. It gives you the flexibility of putting a risk equation within the context of your business. So when we talk about those spreadsheets that people are creating, this is what they're doing. They're bringing that data in, and then they're applying their own context to it. So here you can see we've got a default equation out of the box. So it's like, hey, based on its severity, its CVSS 4 score, what kinds of assets are included in these findings? So you see we have 6 affected assets. What are those types of assets? Are they servers? Are they workstations? Are they publicly exposed? As well as the asset criticality, like, hey, is this a DMZ asset? Is this an asset that operates on very sensitive data? Those are really important criteria to be able to bring into your risk equations, as well as like, hey, is there an exploit available for this? Those are the types of information that you have available, and I can briefly show you how you can do that. But this is a really powerful mechanism for distilling that data into a more prioritized list within the context of your business. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say really quick that is huge because I run into organizations all the time where they think about risk differently and they have different ways of showing that risk, and risk scoring is a huge part of that. So like, I think that's just an enormous advantage that you can customize that risk score. It's because there's so many products these days that just have this
Right.
canned, like Well, this is it, guys. This is our like
Yeah.
proprietary risk score you have to use, and I like this approach much better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like nobody likes kind of being told like what their risk is in a black box. Like it's
Yeah,
like, no, I actually want to have some input into that, right? Like I know, I'm the one that's on the hook with my board or my stakeholders on,
exactly.
why I'm choosing this one over another one. So I'd like some more input into that as well. And so this is how we can score findings at a finding level. So now if you start to think about like, hey, over time, we're I know we're just doing a brief demo, but we have a lot of depth here where you can bring in data from various sources: pen tests, vulnerability scanners, pen tests as a service platforms, code scanners, all of those, right? So we've got that data in, and we can score those individual findings. But now we're starting to find themes, right? Excuse me. Now we're starting to find programmatic areas of risk, right? Hey, we have susceptibility to threat actors related to like APT 29, or we have a large contingent of remote access issues, right, related to people working from home or on the road, or VPNs, all of those kinds of things. So we'd like to be able to start to be able to group those into more programmatic areas of risk and be able to report our status and progress on those. And that's really where our priorities module comes into play. This is the notion of, hey, we've got these groupings of risk items that we want to address that will help our overall risk posture, right? So just like the findings, you can also score priorities. So you'll see here, I've sorted this by their risk score within the priority themselves. I mentioned remote access software, but let's dive into maybe like, hey, we feel like we've got a lot of issues related to APT 29. So those findings may have been tagged as APT 29, or we have assets that have exposures related to APT 29. So if we dive in here, the priority is kind of more that project plan of like, hey, here's the problem, we have issues related to this. Here's the recommendations, and here's kind of our treatment plan. And this is all customizable. You can edit that. But you'll see here, we've got 77 findings linked to this priority and 36 assets. So the notion being that, hey, as we start to address the issues related to this priority, that risk score will continue to decrease. Again, this risk score is calculated with a similar equation as on the findings level, but it's based on like, hey, how many findings are included in this priority? What are their severities and their risk scores? That kind of derive this ultimate prioritized risk score. So then if we were to dive in, we can see the findings and their risk scores associated. So the notion being like, hey, as we address these issues, our risk will continue to decrease related to this priority. And then we can also have metrics around our priorities, right? And this is where we're excited about, like, the fact that we have this data to get, within PlexTrac, that you have all this data together. You've now had a way to prioritize it. Now you can actually start to show progress and start to tell the story over time. Hey, where are we dragging behind on certain issues, or like how things continue to increase in risk due to things like age, or like the criticality of those assets has changed. And then who's responsible for these, right? Because at the end of the day, somebody has to get the work done, and that's what we provide, within like these priorities themselves. Like, hey, this is the owner of them. Here's who's the owner for the specific treatment plan, things like that. So not just being able to see the prioritized list, but also be able to mobilize the teams responsible for fixing them and being able to report on that progress over time.
Yeah, that's a great feature, because I often find, especially in large organizations, accountability is just hard to oversee, right? Especially when
Right.
you have a lot going on. Security team is so busy, but to give, that visibility into like, who is assigned to
Yeah.
actually fix the issue, and then be able to report on that. I mean, that's a big
Yeah.
win.
Yeah, exactly. And then like kind of one last kind of to tie the bow on this, obviously we could go way in depth on, but we don't have that much time.
Yeah.
Everybody that logs into PlexTrac does have this My Work section where it's like, hey, these are the things that have been assigned to me, their criticality. We also have this notion of SLAs that you can assign two types of findings. So, this is a demo environment. We're not doing really good at fixing some of these issues. Like, hey,
The
we're
demo
way
environment sucks.
right
Yeah.
here. But you can offer customized notifications around this, so people will
Yeah.
start getting notified that, hey, this is a critical issue. It's nearing its SLA. It's outside of its SLA, and then you can actually have like kind of an escalation thread of like, hey, okay, somebody needs to really start understanding what they're doing in terms of what we're doing in terms of remediating this risk, right? So that's like kind of a brief demo, but like this is how we help teams really solve that data. That data, one, we already support the data ingestion issue, right? And then the prioritization and aggregation of that data into like, hey, we now have a pretty good view within the context of our business what we should be working on first, and then being able to know who's working on it, what's the workflow around that, and are we actually, showing progress and fixing things over time?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you have a good success story from one of your customers that maybe was in that spreadsheet hell that we talked about, and how did PlexTrac like address their specific issue?
I would say we have lots of success stories. So on the service provider side, folks that were very skilled in vulnerability management, they're very skilled in penetration testing, and they wanted to start offering this kind of pen test as a service, managed security service offering to just continue to improve the security posture of their customers as well as continue to add revenue because they're a business. And so using PlexTrac in this priorities capability, we're able to roll that out as a managed service to their customers and be able to facilitate risk scoring unique to each customer, right? And I think that's a really nice feature that we can support from a customizable perspective. Is that it's not something you could have service providers like, hey, this is how we score everybody, but it's also like, hey, they have that personal touch with their customers that they can actually say, hey, here's how we're going to score your risk, and if that changes over time, you can adjust it. We can do that, but then it becomes a much more unique experience offering with their customer base. So that's one example. And I know I'm speaking in generalities because I can't speak specific, but it is true. And then we have we have several enterprise customers that also use the product. And one that comes to mind is one that was truly trying to get better workflow and those that visibility into, hey, are we closing these things on time, right? So they needed to really make sure they knew they had issues. They were coming in and they weren't resolving them in time, but they didn't really have a good way to like show that. So that's where that SLA capability has really come into play. Obviously, being able to prioritize the issues the right way so that those SLAs actually are viable and make sense so that somebody can't necessarily argue them. So the combination of using that prioritized risk scoring with the SLA capabilities really allowed them to get better visibility and truly start focusing on, hey, we're actually able to tell the story around, whether these items are getting fixed or not. And it's just continued to progress. I would say they kind of started small and even taking small chunks, they've seen drastic improvements, from the prior days. So I know it's like high level, but those are some of the success stories that we're actually seeing. And it's exciting because our mission is obviously to make sure people are winning the right cybersecurity battles, right? Like it's a war, it's a long war, and it's only going to continue. And so you got to make sure you're focused on the right things, and that's the best way to ensure that your security posture is improving. So
yeah, I love it. And one thing I wanted to just ask and touch on, because I know that listeners are probably going to thinking of this too, is integrations, right?
Mhm.
Like you guys have a lot of great integrations with, you mentioned like different scanning tools and things like that, but also like those ticketing systems. Can you talk about just like kind of how that is a really important part?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, so there's obviously there's notions of getting the data in and being able to do something with it in terms of like prioritization. So yeah, so we support a variety, all of the major vulnerability scanners in one shape or another. So whether that's an automated API integration or being able to export out of one tool and import it into ours, and then we also have an open API that you can customize any type of tooling. So if we don't support it, we can write against that. So we have a lot of people doing that as well, and even some people that have written their own custom tools and want to bring that into our system. We support all of that. On the near horizon, which you'll also hear about in the next episode, we've got an actual workflow engine that will allow you to be able to facilitate deeper integrations further. And today we also have the notion of webhooks, where so you can actually fire a webhook on certain events and be able to bring data in that way. So continuing to enhance our capability there. But then what's also really important is like, okay, now how do we facilitate the workflow around this? And that's where those integrations with Jira, ServiceNow are really important. And that where those webhooks actually can come into play is like being able, you can send messages to Slack, to Teams. So really helping facilitate the collaboration piece is really important. And that's what we do today, and obviously continue to enhance and improve that over time. But it definitely, makes sure that you're staying as streamlined as possible. You have the visibility and the workflow pieces together, which really make your day a lot easier.
Yeah, and if we can make other administrators and security teams like make their day easier, then all the
Right.
better, because we
Yep.
all need that.
Yeah, exactly. The more time you have to focus on the right things, the better, right?
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, this has been great.
Yeah.
I do want to obviously give you guys a plug. So for all of our listeners that want to find out more about PlexTrac and the great product that they have, you can visit plextrac.com/shared security, and you can sign up for a demo, find out more information about PlexTrac, and the PlexTrac team would be more than happy to connect with you and discuss your needs and get you out of spreadsheets.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. So Dan, again, thank you so much. And for everyone else, stay tuned for episode 3 coming out shortly. And we'll be continuing our conversation with PlexTrac.
Great. Yeah. Thanks again, Tom. Really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. And until next time, stay safe, stay secure, and stay private. Thank you for watching or listening this episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you like to get your podcasts. Visit sharedsecurity.net for merch, previous episodes, and more. If you'd like to help support the podcast, join our Patreon to get ad-free episodes and many more exclusive supporter-only benefits. Visit sharedsecurity.net/supporter for more details.